Hello and welcome to Strategies for Diffusing Unexpected Behavior. This training is brought to you by Behavior Intervention Services. During this training, we will focus on a positive approach to behavior change. We will review how behaviors are learned through antecedents and consequences. We will discuss why behaviors escalate, how to respond to behavior using relationship-based skills, and discuss proactive strategies to prevent behaviors from escalating. All behavior is communication. I invite you to take a look at the pictures. Both pictures are communicating the same thing. One is expected and is what people may call appropriate or pro-social, and the other is unexpected and what people may call inappropriate or maladaptive. Behavior itself is an interaction between an individual and his or her environment. I would like for you to take this opportunity to think about and write down an example of a challenging situation with a student. You don't need to go into lots of detail. It could just be one or two words to help you remember that moment. Next, I would like for you to look at what you have written and use this moment in time as an example to reflect on throughout this presentation. As we move through our presentation, you will make connections between the information presented and what you experienced. Knowing potential triggers can help us with our ABCs, or our antecedents, behaviors, and consequence. Let's take a moment and define those terms. Antecedent is what the person wants to get and/or get away from. It is not necessarily a bad thing. If the antecedent is hunger, eating to get away from hunger can be a good thing. The power in any behavioral equation is the antecedent. It is what the person wants to get or get away from, and they will use a behavior to accomplish this goal. A consequence lets people know whether or not their behavior worked. If it did work, then the next time they experience the antecedent, they will probably use the same behavior. If it did not work, then the next time similar conditions are present, they will probably use a different behavior. Consequences link back to an antecedent and should give the person feedback that lets them know how effective their behavior was and whether or not they should use that behavior again. Think back to the hunger example. If my antecedent was hunger, my behavior was that I chose to eat a salad. The consequence is that I'm full. Then, next time I get hungry, I might choose to eat the same thing again. If the consequence of eating a salad was that I was still hungry, I might choose a different food or behavior to eat next time. Antecedents tell us what was happening in the environment or who was present right before the wanted or unwanted behavior occurred. When we can identify patterns in our antecedents, we can use this information to manipulate the environment in order for the student to be successful. Through your observations and any notes you may have written down, ask yourself, what was happening immediately before the behavior happened? Was it homework time? Was your student asked to do a chore? Was your student told no? Did a particular person enter the room? Who was supporting the individual or person? Have they established a consistent and positive relationship with the student? As you are observing your students and identifying patterns in the antecedents, you may want to consider adjusting the environment or the conditions under which the behavior occurs. We will take a closer look at proactive strategies to prevent unexpected behaviors in Part 3 of our presentation. As mentioned earlier, behavior is what happens after the antecedent. Think back to the example we reviewed on the earlier slide regarding hunger. The behavior chosen to meet that need was eating salad. I now invite you to review the student scenario you identified earlier. Are you now able to identify what the problem behavior is for your student? Keep this problem behavior in mind as we move toward proactive strategies you might select to prevent them. Antecedents, however, are not the only component of the graphic that allows us to support behavior change. Consequences help to support the behavior change process by guiding us in the direction of why the behavior is happening. As a reminder, consequences are not synonymous with punishment. Consequences are what the student gets or avoids when they respond a certain way to an antecedent. We look for patterns in consequences to identify what we call function. Function is what the behavior is serving. Understanding the function of a behavior allows us to create proactive steps toward behavior change. The functions of behavior are to gain or escape attention, gain or escape a tangible item or activity, or gain or escape sensory stimulation. Looking back to your student scenario, are you able to identify a possible function for your student's behavior? What was your student trying to gain or escape? Let's take a look at some examples. First, the student throws the homework. Then the adult gives the student a break. The student is able to then escape from an activity or task. In this example, first the student whines, then the adult ends a phone conversation. The student is able to get access to attention here. First, the student screams for candy, then the adult gives the student candy. In this example, the student is able to get access to a tangible item. In this last example, the student has mosquito bites, the student scratches. The student is able to escape from the sensory feeling of itching. Remember, we are always looking for patterns in behavior, and behavior is communication. How many times have you had something disrupt your day and it made you feel uncomfortable or even agitated? It could have been that someone cut you off in traffic, the coffee shop gave you the wrong order, or you woke up late for work. All of these things are classified as triggers. A trigger is a change or a stimulus in the environment and is an indicator of potential escalation. There are two types of triggers, internal and external. An internal trigger is something that happens inside our body or mind to cause a behavior. This can be hunger, an inability to communicate, or a history of trauma. An external trigger is a factor outside of yourself that causes a behavior, a schedule change, denied an activity, or a schoolwork assignment. Triggers typically occur right before the behavior and can be identified by observing what is going on when the behavior begins. Other triggers may occur long before the behavior. These are known as setting events, and you may have to ask some questions to find out why a behavior happened. By acting as a detective and using your skills of recognition and assessing, you may be able to determine what the trigger is and come up with the proactive approaches to avoid the trigger. You may not always be able to avoid or identify a trigger. Reflect back to the student scenario from earlier in our presentation. Are you able to identify a trigger for the student in your scenario? How does behavior move from a trigger to a crisis? Escalation. Escalation is when our emotions take over and unexpected behavior increases in frequency, duration, or intensity to communicate those feelings. It can look like arguing, noncompliance or defiance, bothering others, off-task behavior, whining or crying, limit testing, or escape or avoidance, just to name a few. Once a situation starts to escalate, it's most beneficial to everyone involved if the focus is on expressing feelings while choosing appropriate behaviors. A lot of explanation and direction can often overload an already overloaded person. In order to diffuse and de-escalate, we want to acknowledge the emotion, focus on supporting the person with calming body language and tone, and provide support. Support can look like giving the student choices on how they can channel their emotion, providing expectations around safety, or just listening and letting the student express how they feel. The best strategy in any escalation is to reduce the amount of interaction until the student is more available to process, listen, and remain calm. Stress can be good or bad. For example, buying a home or starting something new and exciting can be good stress. When something happens to us that we don't want to happen, such as a relationship goes south, or we must stay home to stay safe during a pandemic, That can be distressing. Although these events are different, the impact on our internal system are very similar. Stress causes our pulse to rise, our breathing to get quicker, and our endorphins and adrenaline levels to peak. Stress can also cause our internal system to focus so intently on regulating our breathing and rising levels that a lot of other things start to shut down, like our communication, reasoning, compromising, processing, and listening. In order to balance our stress levels and diffuse escalation, it's important to try to release the pressures associated with stress on a regular basis. When we start to see situations escalate with our students or child, it can be an indicator that stress is rising. Consider doing a quick check-in with your child or student to see how you might be able to release those internal stressors. Some examples of stress-reducing activities are to take a walk, practice deep breathing, squeezing a pillow, or drawing. Keep in mind that each of these stress-reducing activities are best implemented when they focus on student choice and preference. For example, if a student doesn't prefer to color, it will not be a stress-reducing activity. Anger is a secondary emotion. Think about the last time you were angry. What did you feel before you became angry? Were you able to communicate your feelings? Remember that behavior is communication, and anger is communication that something needs to change. It typically happens because someone is experiencing fear, shame, or maybe frustration, and are having difficulty expressing those underlying feelings. Thinking back to the scenario you have in your mind from the beginning of this training, did anger come out in the scenario at all? Did you start to see a rise in the other feelings on this slide first? Now that we are familiar with the ABCs of behavior, we can dive deeper into responding versus reacting to behaviors when they occur. Responding versus reacting requires the adult to pause, assess the behavior, and choose a response that best fits the situation at the time. As soon as a student responds in a defiant way, we often have an emotional reaction and immediately react. When we react without thinking, it can sometimes lead to feelings of regret and frustration from both the child and adult. A response, on the other hand, is what happens after you've taken a moment to assess the situation and choose a response that will get the best outcome. Sometimes a child's behaviors can be triggering for you, and you may have a stress response. Recognize that you are having an emotional reaction and allow yourself a moment to take a deep breath before responding so that you can address the student in a calm, neutral tone. Often, your initial calm response can be the best thing to get your child or student back on track. Taking that time to breathe and respond, you may be able to assess a trigger or function of the child's behavior. This will allow you to acknowledge the emotion behind the behavior while still setting the boundaries around the behavior. For example, it is okay to be angry, but it is not okay to hit. When the child recognizes that their emotions are seen, they may be able to calm down, knowing someone has validated their emotions, but not the behavior. If we don't engage in the power struggle, it goes away. Once we can look at these situations objectively and see that we are really in control of the situation, it becomes easier to implement preventative strategies versus getting angry and caught up in the struggle. The ongoing back and forth can become a battle of wills as you say yes and the child says no. The longer the argument carries on, the more difficult it becomes to get the child to comply. The more you argue or try to force a child to do something, the more tempers can flare. When a disagreement or confrontation arises, show the child how to deal with it in a dignified manner. Do engage students in problem solving. If you find yourself engaging in frequent power struggles over the same issue, try to problem solve together. Do offer choices. When possible, offer 2 or 3 choices. Just make sure you can live with either choice. Do limit the amount of talking you do as well. To wrap up this section, let's review an example of a situation that could escalate. Take a moment to read the scenario. Here are some parent options or strategies to consider. Remember to avoid power struggles with the student or child. Present the expectation. Example, focus on the desired behavior more so than the challenging behavior. Focus on the issue rather than attacking the individual. Consider priming the student prior to the transition if the child or student has challenges with transitioning. For example, remember we're going to the grocery store tomorrow afternoon, or we'll be leaving in 5 minutes. Consider allowing the student or child to bring the video game if it's portable and applicable. Consider a first-then option of giving the student or child options, maybe having 3 different choices to choose from, and afterwards saying, where would you like to go after the grocery store? PetSmart, library, or Five Below. Next, we will look at proactive strategies you can use to try to prevent unexpected behaviors from occurring. The first proactive strategy we will review is providing choice. Consider offering choices rather than giving a demand. Giving children and teens choices helps them feel that they have some power and control over what they do. It fosters independence without compromising the adult as lead. The key to giving children choices is to first decide what choices you will allow them to make. You need to make sure you are okay with whichever choice they make. For instance, if you say, it's time to do your homework, your child may say no and invite a power struggle. Instead, you could say, do you want to do your homework before or after dinner? This gives your child an opportunity to decide, but the homework is still scheduled to get done. Using a visual schedule is another proactive strategy to support your students' unexpected behaviors. The use of a visual schedule at home and at school may help increase participation in activities and reduce anxiety. Students crave structure and routine. When they know what to expect throughout the day, they feel safe and secure. For example, the day can be divided into smaller sections or tasks. Consider sitting down and making a visual schedule together. Students will feel they had a say, and it's harder to argue with the predetermined schedule. Throughout the scheduled routine, give transition reminders and have students identify what comes next in the schedule. Replacing negative words with positive words sounds easy enough, but does take time to master. All day long, our children and teens hear the word no and are told what not to do. This next strategy focuses on replacing negative words with positive ones. Rather than teaching them by telling them what not to do, it's a lot easier to tell them exactly what we want them to do. They now know what to replace the unexpected behavior with, rather than to be left with the question, what should I be doing instead? There are absolutely still times to say no, but the more sparingly it is used, the more students will listen when it is needed. Prepping a student for change can be a useful strategy as well. Sometimes there may be a change in routine or something has come up that has changed the plans. Flexibility can be hard for anyone, especially children. If you know ahead of time of a change, prep your child or students for the change. Take the time ahead of the change to discuss in detail what is happening and what is going to happen instead. When they know ahead of time, it can bring predictability and safety back to their day, even with an unexpected change. Sometimes we don't know the change is happening until it happens. Remain calm and strive to demonstrate our own flexibility through self-talk. For instance, oh no, I forgot to buy chicken at the grocery store today. That's okay, we can save that for dinner later. Tonight we will have hamburgers. This model can help children feel secure and model how to handle an unpredictable situation. A more focused aspect of prepping is called priming. Priming is a strategy to help students preview situations before they occur and helps events become more predictable. Priming can occur at home or in the classroom. Some students who need routine and predictability are more successful when they are prepared for what's coming. It is most effective when it is built in as a part of the student's routine. Priming supports the behavioral and academic success of students. Positive reinforcement can be incorporated into school and home routines when the student is successful with priming. Priming helps to promote student success, help them to become familiar with the materials or expectations, and also provides predictability about the information or activity to help reduce frustration. Reinforcement is a way to be proactive to prevent unexpected behaviors. Reinforcement can be a variety of things. First, you will need to decide what kind of reinforcement you want to give. Reinforcement comes in all shapes and sizes. It could be behavior-specific praise. By behavior-specific, I mean not just good job or way to go. We want to be specific, such as, I like how you used your checklist after school today to get all your homework done. Or, way to go choosing your calm down strategy of breathing when your sister ate the last donut. Likewise, the teacher shared with me that you participated in class today by using the chat box. Great job. A gesture with a thumbs up or a high five could be included while giving behavior-specific praise. By giving behavior-specific praise, your student knows exactly what it is that you are acknowledging and reinforcing. A special activity, such as a game with a family member or access to something that is tangible, such as a book or use of an electronic device, are also examples of reinforcers. If your student is already accessing a strong reinforcement frequently, you may want to consider looking at some new reinforcers. Decide what the reinforcer will be, when you will reinforce, and what behaviors you will reinforce. Label the behavior for the student. Deliver reinforcement immediately when the behavior occurs. The last proactive strategy we will cover today is to teach your student calming or coping strategies when feeling dysregulated. Some of these strategies could include using fidgets, practicing breathing exercises, coloring, meditating, or going for a walk. Some things to consider when implementing these strategies is to explicitly teach your student the strategy by systematically breaking down how to use each one. Model how to use these strategies and consider using videos or role play. You can also model yourself using strategies when dysregulated throughout the day by using self-talk. The teaching of these strategies should be when a student is calm and not in the moment when a student is dysregulated or experiencing problematic behavior. Remember, we are teaching these strategies when the child is calm and available to learn them instead of waiting until they are escalated. Think back to your student or child scenario you chose at the beginning of this presentation. What strategies might you use to plan, teach, and reinforce these behaviors? Thank you for taking the time today to learn more about positive approaches to support for unexpected behaviors. Our hope is that you are leaving with a better understanding of why behaviors occur and ways to respond and support your student in de-escalating or preventing in those unexpected behaviors. We invite you to review the considerations above and commit to implementing a proactive strategy and also a strategy to diffuse an escalating behavior. This presentation has been brought to you by Behavior Intervention Services with Fairfax County Public Schools.